My name is Nicky Odgers and I'm an educational psychologist. I work in private practice in Cambridge and I have a particular interest in supporting young people and children with anxiety. And within the school context, obviously, there's a lot of that comes out in terms of school avoidance because of anxiety. But school avoidance doesn't start off with kids not coming into school. Often there's all sorts of anxiety that happens before that, before ultimately you can end up with kids not going to school at all.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Nicky. And I've got Nicky on for a few reasons. Well, firstly, Nicky, you were one of our first guests, I think, a long time ago, weren't you? What were you talking about?
Oh my goodness, Rachel, that is going back in the depths of time. I think I was talking about growth mindset.
Yes, that was it. It was brilliant.
That was it. Yeah. Thank you.
So there's like I was saying, a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think all this stuff about kids and school avoidance, I find really fascinating. And I know a lot of our listeners have children who are school age and have children that, if they're not school avoiding, may be quite anxious in other ways. You know, I have kids myself, and at certain times, all of them have been anxious about various things. So I think this is something that we all have going on in our lives, really. Secondly, I've got you on, Nicky, because listeners don't know this, but Nicky is my go-to wise old owl. And so I'll use less of the old.
Less old, thanks, Rach.
Nicky and I spend hours and hours cogitating about various new models and concepts in psychology. And, you know, if you sit there saying, well, I thought about this the other day, Nicky will say, yeah, well, you know what? And she's already read 5 books about it and delved deeply into it. So Nicky's just the best fountain of knowledge about all things psychological. So, so she'd already talked about growth mindset, which you introduced me to, which we use all the time. And side note, today was A-level results day.
So, and what a day for anxiety for families across the country.
Oh my goodness. And I didn't sleep well last night. You know, I did wake up really early thinking, what if? And luckily my daughter, she been a total superstar. But we have a lot of our own anxiety about our children, and presumably we pass that on to them massively as well. But we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the reasons, Nicky, I thought it would be good to talk about anxiety in kids and teenagers is because whenever I've talked about it with you, a lot of the tips and things that you've given, I've thought to myself, oh my goodness, those directly apply to me and they apply to adults as well. Now, I know that you are a child educational psychologist, so your remit is very much working with kids and teenagers, but really, I think as adults, we don't know this stuff ourselves. And a lot of us are not just coping with kids with anxiety, but we're coping with our own anxiety, and we're coping with colleagues, maybe partners, who are also very anxious about stuff. So I'm hoping that this podcast will help us on lots of different levels, you know, coping with people back at home, but also perhaps coping with some of our colleagues.
Well, I certainly think a lot of the theory around anxiety can be applied to grown-ups as well as kids. And I think just as when you work with kids, one of the things you're hoping to do with them is to help them understand anxiety, the purpose of anxiety, what maintains anxiety. I mean, certainly that's something that as adults as well can be very helpful in terms of thinking about how you as a grown-up can manage your own anxiety. And of course, we're going through sort of an epidemic of anxiety at the moment. I mean, and, you know, partly I think that's some of the overhang of COVID that's still here. And I think it's really important for people to sort of learn more about it, learn more about the theory of it, because I think once you understand it, then you have a much better grip on how you can actually learn to deal with it. And that's ultimately what we want, isn't it? We want people to go out and be able to feel they can cope and their lives aren't ruled by anxiety.
Okay, so many questions. Firstly, I know you've mentioned COVID, and I know that you've seen a massive rise in school avoidance since COVID. Is it purely COVID, or is there something else going on in this sort of anxiety epidemic, do you think?
I think it's really difficult to tell. I mean, I think COVID did have a pretty big impact on things. I think it reduced opportunities for young people to go out and do things that are sort of age appropriate for them. And so when they emerged 2 years later, often they hadn't had the opportunities to go out and do things and learn that actually they can cope with them and they can do them. And so suddenly, they went in maybe to COVID as an 11-year-old, they came out as a 13-year-old, and they're being asked to do things that typical 13-year-olds can do. And if you are of an anxious disposition anyway, and you haven't had the experience of doing these things in little steps that gradually get you to what a typical 13 you might be able to do, then actually suddenly that big step seems really tricky and really difficult, and it can feel very overwhelming for young people. So I think, certainly within schools, you now seem to see a lot more anxiety and school avoidance. The levels of attendance are really a big cause for concern at the moment, and the Department of Education is constantly producing information about that. And not all of that obviously is to do with anxiety, but I think quite a lot of it might be. And then, of course, there are all the sort of things that, teenagers always have to cope with. So, high stakes exams, as we said, it's A-level exam day today. Social media. It's not to say that all social media is bad. Sometimes social media can be fantastic, can be sort of a lifeline for connection. But, when things go wrong with social media, then that can be quite tricky as well. So I think it's a whole range of different things really that are causing anxiety amongst our young people at the moment.
I think similar things probably causing anxiety amongst our older people as well. Social media doesn't help, overwhelm after COVID. And I do remember, when lockdown finished, it was quite anxiety inducing going and doing stuff that was completely routine, like going to a shop or a concert. You're suddenly like, oh my gosh.
Absolutely. And you've been given the message for the last, 2 years, it's really dangerous out there. So if you are of an anxious disposition, you believe it, right? Oh, well, it genuinely was dangerous at one point as well. But, how do you pull back from that? That's the thing, isn't it? And you guys as medics, you had an absolute shocker. It was extraordinary what you guys did during the pandemic to keep everyone together, and incredibly difficult circumstances. So, it's totally unsurprising if, as a medic, you felt overwhelmed and you felt anxious, about everything that happened, and then that overspills. And you see that with children. So you see, well, particularly with kids who are avoidant about coming to school, but, you might have a child with sort of an anxious disposition, and then something happens. So, it might be a bereavement, it might be a family separation, it might be just something a little bit tricky or traumatic, and that's a trigger. And at that point, the anxiety can sort of slightly, take on a bigger role in kids' lives. And as I said, I'm not a psychologist of grown-ups, but it would seem plausible that, exactly the same things would happen amongst adults as well.
Thought it was interesting that you said that we're just not very anxiety literate. And I know we had a conversation before this podcast about, who's going to be listening? Is it going to be healthcare professionals? We can have psychiatrists listening, we can have GPs, etc. In my opinion, I don't think doctors are very literate about anxiety. Some people might be if they really looked into it, but I certainly didn't know much about it. And traditional GP training has very little psychology in it. And so we do find it really difficult to understand ourselves. And one thing that I find quite difficult to tell the difference between is, fair enough anxiety, like something you actually should be anxious about, and something that is overblown anxiety. And I do think there's a little bit of a zeitgeist, and I have noticed it sometimes with teenagers saying, well, I have anxiety around this issue. And I'm thinking, well, no, you're just worried about this. That's normal, So people saying, I have anxiety about my exams. No, you're just worried about your exams, and that is fair enough anxiety. That is really, really normal, right? But we seem to have pathologized it a little bit.
So I think that's a really interesting point, Rachel. And I think what's really important to know is that everyone has anxiety, absolutely everyone in the world, and it's really, really helpful. Like, we need anxiety. Anxiety keeps us safe. So if you're just looking at it from a biological perspective, you feel anxiety or fear when you feel under threat. And when you feel under threat, your body is primed to release cortisone and adrenaline, and it just pumps you up and gets you ready to deal with that threat that's coming along. And from a biological perspective, what we're looking at is that threat from, I don't know, 100,000 years ago, which was probably I wouldn't say a mammoth, but I'm pretty sure that's the wrong time zone for grown-ups and
there would have been some sort of tiger.
Yeah, like a tiger thing, right?
Something with teeth.
Yeah, exactly, something with teeth. Right. So what you had to do was you had to like bash it over the head or run away as fast as you can, or like go completely still and just freeze. So that's the fight, flight, or sometimes freeze response. And that's what kept you safe. But of course, in modern days, unless you're very, very lucky, you're unlikely to come across something with big, scary teeth. But you have all these other things that are going on. So you would have A-levels, or you would have like a really stressful meeting, or you have things where you think you're under threat, and your body responds in exactly the same way as it did, as humans did, 100,000 years ago when we were faced with that big, scary tiger. So all those hormones are running around your body, and you have those physical sensations in your body. So you have fluttery tummy, your heart beats really fast, your face might be flushed, you feel sick. It's rubbish, right? It feels absolutely rubbish when you are frightened in that way. And it's a really unpleasant feeling. But sometimes anxiety now is helpful. So, for example, if we go back to the exam things we were talking about earlier, actually a little bit of adrenaline is quite good. It gets you thinking straight. It gets you geared up, helps you revise, puts you in a bit of panic, helps you revise. So a little bit of anxiety is actually quite good because it will gear you up to do the things that you need to do. The problem comes when you have lots of false alarms. So when you start to feel you're under threat, when actually you're not really. And sometimes that can happen a little bit, and that's kind of fine. But if it starts to happen a lot, then actually that can become quite a big problem, because what then happens is it really interferes with your life. And then that can become really tricky.
So the anxiety in itself often isn't the issue. It's actually our dealing with it that then becomes the issue. And as you see in kids, they get very anxious or heightened anxiety, and then they have ways of dealing with it that then are really unhelpful. Is that what you're saying?
So I think it's really helpful to think about anxiety in terms of thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, and behaviours. Because when we sort of look at it in the whole like that, first of all, we can unpick all the different bits of anxiety, and they're all linked together, but we can also begin to see what maintains the anxiety. And as you say, what the issue is actually, it's not the anxiety in itself, but if it carries on for long periods of time and it starts to really get in the way of other things, then that's when it becomes a problem. So what we want to do is to think about how we can deal with anxiety when it's a false alarm. If it's real, right, it's good to be scared of stuff. Run from the tiger. But so we need to be able to work out what to do when they're false alarms. Okay. So we have just been on a holiday in Europe, and I am really frightened of driving in Europe because I've never done it, right? So I've been driving in the UK for over 30 years. I am a very competent driver. I've never had an accident. I'm very safe. Like, I know I'm safe. But in Europe, I think, oh my God, if I get in the car, I will kill us all because I'll do something stupid. So my thoughts are, I won't be able to do this. I can't cope. I will kill us all. We will all die a horrible death on an Austrian Alps. And I know that's kind of stupid when I stop and listen to it, but that is sort of what I think. So when I think about driving, I just sort of get slightly panicky, right? And I feel a little bit sick in my tummy. So that's sort of the physical sensations. And I feel worried. So that's the feeling. And the behavior that then happens is that I make every excuse underneath the sun, so I don't drive. And my husband, who drives all the time in Europe and is very accommodating, just says, should I put you on the drive? Should I put you on the insurance to drive it? And every time I'm like, oh, yes, let's do it. That's fine. I'll definitely drive this time. And I don't do it. So my behaviour there is I avoid it because it's scary. I don't want to do it. Why would I do something that's scary? And that's a completely normal response. Okay, so let's just go through that again. So the thoughts are, I'll be useless, I won't be able to do it, and I'll kill us all. Okay, so that's my thought, that's my anxious prediction. My physical sensation when I think about it is I sort of start to hyperventilate and I feel a little bit sick. And the behaviour is avoidance. And that would be a very typical kind of pattern. So you have an anxious prediction, which is really negative. So what I've actually done there is that I have, again, this is very typical of people with anxiety, is they over predict that something bad is going to happen. And they over predict how bad the thing is going to be. We're all going to die, right? And they under predict their ability to cope. I won't be able to do it. So that's just a little overview of how it worked. But let me just give a little thing, follow on from that, which I think gives us a little bit of context into the moving on bit, which is around how do you deal with it. So for various reasons, this time my husband, who is a fanatical cyclist, wanted to go off on his bike that he'd hired. So this time, instead of saying, it's all right, Nicky, I'll drive, he said, oh no, I need to go and collect my bike and you need to give me a lift there and then you need to drive back to the house all by yourself. And so I kind of had to do it this time. I kind of had to step up and do it. So I was very brave and I did it. And of course, it was utterly fine. So this thing I've been avoiding for 20 years was completely fine because I've been driving for 30 years. I've never had an accident. I'm a very competent driver. So I got back into the house. I was like, great, driving's fine. But an hour later, what my brain said was, got away with it. This time I got away with it. But next time, who knows what could happen? So next couple of days, again, my husband's off cycling, so I have to go and drive the car, cheer myself up. Every time I think, oh my goodness, this is, tricky, but actually every time I could do it and it was fine. And that's one of the things that is really important to know about anxiety, is that the drive is that you avoid the thing that you're scared of. Everyone does this. Like, it's completely normal and natural. Like, everyone in the whole world, if you possibly can, you do. Because, frankly, it's horrid. Who wants to do it? And, potentially die and, all those things I was telling you about, right? But when you avoid things, what you do is you lose the opportunity to learn that actually it's not so bad. Probably the really terrible thing isn't going to happen. And also, very importantly, that you can cope. So even if it goes wrong, you can cope. And again, there was a really interesting, there was an example of this. So we were parked somewhere, the second time in the car driving, and it was an uphill reverse start, which we live in Cambridge. Rachel and I live in Cambridge. Cambridge is like the flattest place in the entire world. Like, literally, we don't have hills. There's no hills for miles around. So, like, no experience for probably the last 20 years of reversing up a hill anyway. And then there was this new, handbrake catch thing, which didn't work. And I could not get this bloody thing to work. And there was a cyclist standing a metre in front of me. Every time I tried to reverse, I inched further towards the cyclist instead of going up the hill, kept going downhill. Like, it was a nightmare. In the end, I just said to my husband, I can't do it. You have to do it for me. And we got out and he did it for me. But actually, even though, in a sense, some of my negative predictions about I won't be able to do it sort of came true there, what I actually did then was I was like, but that's like, why didn't that work? What was wrong with the handbrake? So I went away, looked at some YouTubes. Oh, that's how electric handbrakes work. Oh, okay. And I went outside and I practiced on a hill when there was no one around. And I got it. So even when things go wrong, they can be opportunities to learn. So it's not like you have to try things and it always goes right.
So you're saying that as you drove more and more and more, your brain was saying less and less, oh, you got away with it. You got away with it. You just sort of got habituated and used to it.
I got habituated, but what was interesting was about how long it took. So one of the things that happened was, first couple of drives, my husband was in the car with me, and then what happened? I was like, well, I can do it while he's in the car with me, right? But if he gets out of the car, then it's not going to work, right? And I realized what that was. That's called a safety behavior, right? And again, when you have anxiety, then lots of people have what we call safety behaviors. So, for example, if you have social anxiety, some people's safety behaviors might be, for example, to put lots of makeup on. So they're sort of hiding their self. They can't go out without their makeup because the makeup in some ways keeping them safe. Or it might be that you are preparing what your topics of conversation beforehand. So like you can go out and you can do it, but only if you thought around beforehand what you're going to say. Or with kids going to school, for example, it could be, it's fine, I can go into school, but only if Miss Brown's there with me and she meets me at the front gate. So those are safety behaviours, right? So they are sort of reassurance that things are going to be okay. But actually the reality is, really, how does makeup keep you safe? How does my husband being in the car really keep me safe, apart from in reversing upwards up the hill?
Yelling, stop!
Stop. Yeah, you're right. But often they sort of take on a life of their own as well. So, again, that's something to think about if you are anxious, or if you've got a child who's anxious, are they relying on safety behaviours to sort of keep them through? Because actually what you really want to help people, or young people, to do is to feel confident that they can cope on their own and they're not having to rely on these kind of safety behaviours to keep them through.
So that's interesting. So there's two ways of dealing with that anxiety which are not helpful. So the first one being absolutely avoiding that thing, like the plague.
Absolutely. And avoidance tends to make stuff worse.
Right.
It's not just, it just sort of leaves it in a neutral state. It makes it worse.
And that's really hard, isn't it? Because if you have a child with anxiety, then as a parent, you want to make it better. And so you say, oh, no, of course, darling, you don't need to do that. No, don't worry, you don't need to go to that. You don't need to do that. I'll do that for you. I'll sort it out. And you jump into rescuer mode. And that's not a very helpful way of doing it.
But the other thing that it's really important to know is that our children are our most precious things in the world, right? Like, we love them more than anything. And, if you're looking from a biological perspective, you want to keep them, survival of the species, you want to keep them safe, right? So of course we do that. Like, everyone does that, of course, because that's normal and natural, and we do it because we love them. And so no one should feel bad or guilty about doing that, because you're doing something that's normal and protective. And what's interesting is there's research that suggests that if you've got a child who doesn't have an anxious disposition, going out and sort of helping them and, stepping involved doesn't increase their anxiety at all. But if you have kids who do have an anxious disposition, then sometimes what can happen is that if as a parent you step in a little bit too early, I'd say parent, but frankly, it doesn't have to be a parent. It could be anyone around them. It could be a grandparent. It could be an aunt. It could be a friend. It could be a teacher, like people who want to help. So sometimes if you've got people around the child who are sort of stepping in really early and reducing opportunities for kids to have a go at stuff, what can happen is, well, first of all, the child doesn't have the opportunity to have a go at stuff. And so they never learn that actually it's probably not so bad, or they can cope. But also kids are like really tuned in on those around them. So if they are looking up at granny or the teacher or mum or big sister or whatever, and like the mum, like they're looking anxious or, whatever, then the kid is, if you've got an anxious disposition, then you're going to be thinking, oh my God, like there really is something to be worried about now, right? And if, everyone's jumping in to help me, then, I'm absolutely right to be worried. And so it can have sometimes a sort of counter, it can be not helpful. But what I want to stress is that really nobody should feel bad about this. Like, it's honestly, it's like human nature. right? So, and we're like programmed to do this. But it's helpful possibly to be thinking about, are there people in the child's realm who might be completely inadvertently and with absolutely the best intentions enabling the child to avoid the things that they're finding really scary? And the other thing I want to say about this is that when we're talking about, if you've got a child or a young person who's really anxious about things, like they're already at the anxious point, right? So if you are going to try and help them to face their fears and to learn that they are able to cope, what you're absolutely not going to do is say, well, avoidance is terrible, we're just going to make you face your fears full on, in the same way that you wouldn't, like if somebody had a phobia of spiders, you wouldn't say, right, we're going to lock you in a room for 2 hours with 25 tarantulas, right? And that would just call you a phobia because you'll just learn you're okay. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about encouraging kids to face their fears, because that's too much. So what happens if you put children, young people in that situation, and I imagine grown-ups as well, but again, as I say, it's not my area, is that if people are too overwhelmed, they don't learn. And what you're hoping to be able to do is for the young person to learn that they can cope. So you are not throwing kids in the deep end with stuff. You are not saying face your most dangerous fears, straight off. What you might be doing is saying, okay, so this is something if it's school, or if anxiety, for instance, I know at the moment you're really anxious about, going to school. Let's just break it down. Let's break it down into 10 little steps. What would the first step be? Putting your school uniform on. Just try it. What do you think will happen if you put your school uniform on? Let's see, shall we? Ooh, interesting. What will happen? Let's do a little experiment to find out. And so you're breaking it down to steps. So the first one might be put your school uniform on. The second one might be put your school uniform on and drive in the car with mum or dad very slowly past the school gates at 6 o'clock in the evening when there's nobody around. And then step number 3 might be to walk up to the school gates at 3 o'clock when school's coming out. So you are providing opportunities for children or young people to face their fears, but in a series of really teeny weeny steps at a rate that feels manageable for them. And the idea is that by doing this, they are learning new information about the experience, and that it's not as awful as they think it's going to happen, and also that they learn that they are able to cope. And that's one of the key approaches to supporting with anxiety. But obviously, it's really scary because, because everyone wants to avoid things that they're scared of, like everyone. So the key there is to pitch it at the right level so it's not overwhelming, and so that you are able to have success.
Just thinking about how this might apply to adults. I know that often situations happen, don't they? And I'm just thinking, maybe if you've made a mistake in your practice, and then people are very avoidant of doing that thing again because, well, I made a mistake last time, and it can completely cripple people for years and years and years. But again, it's that sort of, I guess, supported, graded exposure really is what you're talking about.
Yes, and presumably, I'm not a medic, Rachel, but there must be, I hope there are procedures in place to support doctors when, things have gone wrong, and it's not just punitive, it's, okay, let's do it in a supportive way. Because everyone makes mistakes. Like, doctors aren't superheroes. Like, everyone in the world makes mistakes sometimes. It just happens.
Yeah. And there are certainly things that can support, but I think a lot of people are left pretty unsupported. I think what happens with anxiety with lots of people in healthcare is, even if it's not based on a mistake or something that's happened, the more stressed we get, we end up sort of catastrophizing and predicting about things that are going to happen, which I'm sure is the same for children, for teenagers, and for adults. And then we have this really uncomfortable feeling that we think we just got to make go away.
And that's really hard.
And no one likes feeling anxious. And if we're on the receiving end of someone else's anxiety, again, even if it's not a child, but maybe it's a trainee or a colleague, we think we have to make their feeling go away by rescuing them and doing that thing that they are anxious about, because that is being a good colleague. But from what you said, actually, that's often going to make things worse rather than make things better.
But I think with kids, what you would be, I mean, again, Rachel, this is up to you to say whether you think this is appropriate for adults or not. But if you had a colleague who was if I was talking to a parent and saying, how you could support your child with anxiety. So remember what we said, that like the thinking often goes a little bit wonky with, because it's a false alarm. So people will sort of catastrophize often. It's all, it's going to be a disaster, or it's sort of black and white thinking, so it's either all great or all awful. So the thinking is, so you can have what we call thinking errors. So what happens is that people tend to have automatic thought. Well, if you have a big feeling about something, often you can link it back to what we call an automatic thought. So an automatic thought is something that just pops into your head and often goes unchallenged, and often can sort of stem back to like even things in your childhood, for instance, and they're just wrong. And there tend to be sort of certain, as we said, categories of thinking of these automatic thoughts. So like catastrophizing for one, sort of black and white thinking, fortune telling. If I do that procedure, it's going to go wrong. If I go into school, everyone will hate me. And what can be really interesting, we talk about with sometimes with kids, is you try and get them to catch the thoughts. So what is the thought that they're actually thinking? And again, if you're a parent with a kid, you could say, well, what do you think is going to happen? So again, you're trying to identify the anxious prediction. What do you think is going to happen? And sometimes just sort of verbalizing stuff is enough to make others think, oh, actually, do I really think that, or is that a little bit bonkers? So with kids, what you might want to be doing is, if a child is really worried about something, you ask questions. So, what do you think is going to happen? Has that happened before? Has that happened to anyone you know? What would be so bad about that happening? So instead of sort of going for reassurance, and kids sometimes can become a little bit hooked on reassurance. It can be that safety behaviour that we talked about before. So, it'll be okay this time because mum and dad told me, it was all right. And I think at that point, what you want to do is, to move into the questions, because the questions, why do you think that? So what do you think is going to happen? Has that happened to anyone before? So what that does is gently allows the person you're talking to just reflect on whether their thought is true or not. It just opens up the possibility. If you are actively trying to persuade someone that what they're saying is nonsense, they might appear to agree with you, but whether they actually believe you or not, I think is, questionable. If you're sort of trying to force people into believing something, I don't think that really works. But by the questioning approach, what you're doing is you're just helping them to think things through, and just to think, oh, actually, how have I got that right? And as I said, because they are these automatic thoughts, often people don't question them. They just sit there, and can have a very powerful effect on people.
I think we often think that we know what someone else is thinking as well. So it's like, right, well, I know exactly what Nicky's thinking right in this situation. She's anxious. I know what she's thinking. Well, you have no idea unless you actually say, Nicky, what's behind that? What's, what things are going through your head now?
Yeah.
Yes. And then you might come back with, oh yeah, I'm going to kill everyone in France if I drive on the road, right?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Okay, is that true?
But that sort of mind reading thing is another, very typical one of the sort of thinking errors. So, for example, like if you've got social anxiety, typical thought might be, they think I'm so boring. I'm just boring them to tears. They just think I'm awful. Like, why would they want to hang out with me? That's a mind, like, how do you know? Maybe they think you're the most interesting person you've ever met. Like, you have no idea, right? But for some people, those thoughts are just there in their minds all the time. And of course, if you think that, right? Of course, if you think that you're going to be anxious, anyone would be anxious if they thought that the people they were talking to thinks they're incredibly boring, and why would they want to talk to them?
Just on a side note, I was listening to this podcast about mind reading, and they'd looked at the science of it, and they'd actually done a study on who was the best at mind reading. And it was totally hilarious. So who do you think, they were looking at adults and different relationships in adults and who were best at reading their thoughts. Who do you think were the best people at mind reading?
I've got no 50-year-old women, menopausal women.
Menopausal and no friends, maybe. Okay, the people who were the best at knowing what the other person was thinking were couples on their first date.
No.
Oh, yes. Do you know why?
Why?
Because they asked each other.
Oh.
Because they didn't. Okay, so, right, you'll get this one now. Who are the worst at mind reading?
People who've been married for 50 years?
Yes! Married couples, because they thought they knew what the other person was thinking, and they were the
that's
worst.
so interesting.
Yes, isn't it? So the basic thing is nobody can mind read, absolutely nobody. And the more you think you know somebody, the more you think you know what they're thinking, and the more wrong you are. And and so the couples on the first date, because they didn't know each other at all, they'd go, "Oh, what are you thinking? What do you know?" And they would ask each other, so then they would know. But I think that's interesting. So if you're supporting a colleague or a trainee or a child with anxiety, do not assume you know what they're thinking. But I'm interested to hear that you're saying that just the question of asking them is going to be helpful for them as well, because once you have to articulate some of the bonkers thoughts like "I'll kill everyone on the road if I get in that car," you go, "Well, actually, yeah, I know that's a bit extreme, isn't it?" You know, once you hear you say it yourself, say it, that's quite powerful.
But also it gives you a way out. So let me give you, this is, my daughter's going to kill me, but I'm going to tell you this anyway. So this is an example of how it works in children, right? So when my daughter was in year 3 at school, she had a group of lovely friends. And then one week she became very sad, like really distressed. And, I couldn't work out what was going on. So on another Friday or whatever, I said to her, tell me what's happened. And after much sort of probing, she said, well, what's happened is they've all started playing Harry Potter at lunchtime. And they know that I hate Harry Potter. And they're doing it because they don't want to play with me anymore. And she was absolutely devastated. Bless her. So, because I just read a book on using cognitive behavioural therapy approaches with young children, I said to her, darling, should we do an experiment? Like, how can we test that out? What could we do to see whether that's actually true or not? And she said, well, maybe I could ask them. So I was like, maybe you could. Good idea, right? So next school day she went in, and on the way back I said, so what happened? Did you ask them? And she said, yes, I did ask them. And they said, of course we want to play with you. We just like playing Harry Potter. But we thought you didn't like us because you didn't want to play Harry Potter. So, she had just completely and utterly got the wrong end of the stick, right? It was not to any of us as a grown up, we're like, that's nuts, right? But in her head, that was really, really true. And the lovely thing about it is her and all her friends are now 19, 20, and they are still friends. They still go out together. But honestly, if she hadn't asked that question, I think it would have sort of fallen apart. So that's a child example. But what I'm saying is that because there are these automatic thoughts, people don't challenge them. They just pop into your head. And actually having an opportunity to challenge them can be really interesting. But you tend not to do it unless you can catch that thought in your head. And then, it's great if you've got somebody who can ask you those questions. Or maybe what you could do is you could even have a little prompt sheet. Let's just ask them myself, is it true? What's the evidence that thinks true? What's the evidence it's not true? What's most likely? Is it likely? Is there another alternative? You could just have a little crib sheet just to ask yourself. I mean, that's what we'd suggest with sort of older teens.
And it's so funny. You're saying, that's nuts, isn't it? Totally nuts. And here's me thinking, nope, this happens with adults all the time. So many times, wrong end of the stick, someone assumes that the other person's not talking to them because they've somehow said something that offends them, but actually the other person's not talking to me either because they literally didn't see them, or their mind is on a patient that they've just seen and they're worried about that. And it just got me thinking about how many times maybe we assume that the other people is being lazy or obstructive, or, I do sometimes hear, I've probably got lots of irate emails about this, but sometimes you hear more senior doctors talking about the trainees as being quite snowflake, not wanting to step up to this or that. And it does make me wonder about, I think certainly there are different ways in which people work these days. There is that. But I do wonder whether sometimes anxiety in trainees or the younger generation, because it is quite scary when you start having to do all these different things, and then they say, "Oh, I don't feel comfortable with that," or whatever. So they use the sort of language of "I'm not comfortable" or whatever, and all that is just it's just anxiety and avoidance. And then the seniors go, "Well, they're not comfortable. I can't possibly question them what they mean." But if they just sat down and then went, "Actually, yeah, well, tell me what it is that you're not comfortable with. Let's unpick that." The generations might actually start communicating a bit better.
So that's kind of interesting. Like, I mean, so, obviously I'm not a medic. I'm thinking about like you as trainee medics doing stuff for the first, cutting people open. Like, I imagine that's completely terrifying, right? I think that's pretty normal to be frightened of doing stuff like that as a non-medic.
Well, it's interesting, Nicky, because some of those like cutting people open and stuff, you've always got, you do have people around to do that. It's some of the other stuff that is just as anxiety inducing, like going and having that difficult conversation where you might not have that supervision there, or actually doing something on your own that's not a really high stakes procedure, but there's other things that you can really build up in your mind as being, and I think this is actually more to do with interpersonal relationships, perhaps with colleagues, than it is with procedures and things that you do with your patients and things, which are quite highly supervised and you have to be signed off and things like that. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, what's kind of interesting about that, though, is maybe it brings us back to what we were talking about right at the beginning. We were saying that, sometimes you have anxiety and it's for, it's because of false alarms. So like, you've sort of slightly got the wrong end of the stick about how actually worrying it is. But sometimes people are anxious about stuff that is genuinely worrying, right? Like, for real. So, for example, in a school setting, kids being bullied, of course they're going to be anxious, like, but in the same way, I think if you're a medic and you have to do like a really complicated medical procedure that you've never done before, or whatever, of course you're going to be worried about that. And you sort of need a slightly different approach for that. So with kids, one of the things you would be talking about if a child is anxious about something they've got a good reason to be anxious, you might be saying, okay, well, let's do problem solving. Let's actually talk it through. What's the best way to approach this? And actually teaching children and young people a problem-solving framework is super helpful, because often kids just don't know how to do that. So the framework you would be looking at is, okay, so let's really define what the problem is. Let's think about a whole range of different solutions. Doesn't really matter what they are, because we're just, pulling as many as we can out of the air. Then what we want to do is we want to evaluate them. Like, is it a good solution? It's a terrible solution. Is it, good enough? And then, is it doable? Then you choose the best one. And then you might need to practice how you're going to put that into place. And with kids, sometimes it depends what it is. That might involve role play or talking things through or learning a new skill, whatever. And then you say, off you go and have a go, and then come back and you review how that works.
It sounds like coaching to me. You sit down, you talk about what the problem is, you work out what the issue is, you work out how you might solve it, you go and have a go at it. It would really work in adults. I think what we struggle with is actually defining the problem. Because I was going to say to you, in adults, and I'm sure you probably see this in kids as well, it's one thing if you've got a specific thing that they're anxious about. But what if it's sort of just the general anxiety about everything? So it's actually very difficult to identify a specific problem, or are there often very specific underlying things?
Well, it's different. So some kids will have specific phobias or specific things, like, scared of dogs, common ones, scared of going to bed by themselves. So with kids, with those sort of things, what you might be doing is talking about worry time. I don't know how this would apply to grown-ups.
Oh my goodness, 100%. I do worry time. Often if there's something really on my mind, I'll say, right, I can't, I'm going to worry about this later. 6:00, and I get to 6:00, generally it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've applied all this to myself, believe me.
Okay, cool. Well done. So with kids, teens, what you might encourage them to do is just to write a note, put it in a worry monster. Have you seen Worry Monsters, Rachel?
No.
Oh, they're lovely. So worry monsters for
one.
kids. Yeah, get your own. Everyone listening to the podcast should get their own worry monster, right? So they're like toys, monsters, and they often have little pouches or like zipped mouths, and you write down what the worry is, and you pop it in the pouch of the mouth. And then worry time, you come to worry time, and then you take out the worry, and then you think about the worry then. And then that's a good opportunity then, because you can apply problem solving if it's an actual something you can do something about, or you can, ask the questions if you've got, somebody there to help you about it. So worry time is not about, okay, we're just not going to talk about worry, but the purpose of worry time is to say, let's just put it aside to practice putting it aside for the moment so we can come back to it, so that it's not all consuming all the time. Yeah, and different things will work for different people. So if you're in a real, panic about something, those grounding exercises, okay, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, that's great. Or if you're in a total panic about something, okay, let's go through the alphabet. We're going to think of women's names. So Amy, Barbara, Carly, to do that. So that sort of distraction technique can be very helpful, just in terms of sort of calming you down, because what can happen is if you start to sort of focus on the thoughts and the physical sensations, all that like if you're just thinking all the time, as I'm thinking with my car example, I'm going to kill them, like, that's not going to keep you calm, right? Just thinking that is going to maintain the anxiety. If you're focusing on that, I feel sick, like, where's my tummy going? That's going to make you feel anxious. It's going to make you want to avoid it. So if you can try and distract yourself away from things, that can work.
And all those are really helpful. And I know when we do our webinars about anxiety and stress, often we talk about worry time, we talk about distracting yourself with physical activity, star jump, things like that can be really helpful as well. I want to ask you about safety behaviour, because it strikes me that safety behaviour in the way that you described it can be unhelpful just as much as avoidance is unhelpful. Is there ever any safety behaviour that can be helpful? So say, I'm just thinking with adults, as someone being very anxious or almost having a phobia about having a difficult conversation or giving someone feedback, and the avoidance be, well, don't worry, I'll do it for you. But is there ever a case of, you go and do it, I will be in that room over there, and you can stop and phone me at any point, so to almost give them a way out?
I think that sounds like a great idea, but I think that sounds like a one-off conversation. Like if you were, what you would, I suppose the thing is, what you want ultimately is for the person to think, I've got this. Like I can do
without
this.
having to have you in the other room the whole time. Yes. Okay.
But remember what we talked about, small steps. So, if I just can't have this conversation. It's too much for me. It's too overwhelming. But if they can do it with somebody else in the room or just on hand, great. That's one of the small steps towards it. But if they have to have the same conversation, with somebody else, then maybe next time the person on, it doesn't have to be in the room. Maybe they could be at the end of the phone if they need to be. So that's just a series of building it up in small steps, really.
What do you recommend for adults who have, say, anxious kids, anxious dependents, maybe even anxious colleagues? Because I know when we were talking earlier, you said you have to model not being anxious yourself, or model dealing with anxiety well. So how can we model that well to our families and to our patients and to our colleagues?
Well, you can just you can talk about it. You can say, do you know what, when I was your age, I had exactly this problem. And, I felt really panicky about it. But then I thought, and then you tell them, but you could be saying, could do this. Or, for example, you could say, God, I've got this problem at work. I'm really worried about it. I don't quite know what to do. Maybe I'll do that problem solving, that thing we talked about last week. Okay, let's sit it down. I'm going to work it out. So you could do that. Or it could be that if, again, you could say, do you know what? I was at that party the other day and this voice in my head the whole time came up saying, you're so boring, you're so boring, you're so boring. Why would anyone want to talk to me? But, I stopped and I thought about it and I said to myself, actually, I don't think that's true. I don't think I was that boring, actually. So you're sort of just modelling the sort of strategies that we've talked about. Or again, it could be, I'm feeling a little bit panicky now. I'm just going to go and take 3 deep breaths. I'm going to do the grounding thing, 5 things I could hear. So all the techniques that you might want your kids or young people to do, you could be just, you can verbalize it. So you can do that. But I mean, it's really tricky, right? Like, if you've got a kid who's really anxious in front of you, how do you deal with that? And I think, acknowledging the feelings, I can see this, you're really worried about this, normalizing it, lots of people feel worried when they're trying things for the first time. Let them know you're really confident. I'm really confident you can handle this because you've done this before. You did something exactly like this last year when you remember you were worried about that and then you did it. And then let them know that you're there to help. I'm here. You've got your back. You just let me know what I can do to help and I'm with you on this. And I think that message makes them feel heard, normalizes the experience, but also helps them, hopefully, to believe that they can cope. But as I say, it's, often with anxiety, it's sort of small steps, isn't it? And not throwing people into the deep end too much, not asking them to do too much too soon.
And I think that's something we do get wrong in medicine. It's like, yeah, deal with it, just do it, and then you'll be fine. And then it's like, then you feel you have to, and then it's a horrible experience, and then you going, okay, well, I did it, and look how that turned out, and so I'm not doing that again. And just finally, Nicky, I know that in your role as an ed psych, you often deal with neurodiversity, and there are some conditions that make anxiety a lot worse. Is there any changes in what you might do for, say, kids who have autism or ADHD in terms of helping them manage their anxiety? Is it a different sort of anxiety or is it exactly the same, just with different ways of coping?
Well, so people with autism often have higher rates of anxiety. Considerably higher rates of anxiety than others. So, there's some research that suggests that, over 70% of people with autism have sort of measurable levels of anxiety. So that's kind of like a pretty big deal, right? And for those people, there are issues around sensory sensitivities that can make them feel very overwhelmed. So you would want to be doing something kind of different for them around that. If they're in noisy environments, then we might be thinking about, ear defenders, or can they just go and do their stuff somewhere quieter? Or with kids, there's a lot of labels and uniforms that just is like really find quite difficult, and that can be very overwhelming. And also with people with autism, there's a lot of because of the difficulties with social communication, social understanding, that can also make life very difficult for them, and they can particularly social anxiety can become an issue. And also, I think sometimes because they can be, sometimes a little bit quirky personality, certainly in school settings, sometimes they can become victims of bullying. So actually then genuinely, really rubbish things happening to them. So I'm not sure it's that the feeling is different, but the triggers for the anxiety can be different, and then they need to be supported in different ways. So as I said, with the sensory stuff, it's around how can we manage the environment to make that more supportive. With social understanding, it can be around, well, how can we help them to understand, what might be going on in the situation, so they've picked up on the nuances correctly and are not thinking, somebody doing that means that everybody hates me, or, whatever, that's sort of perpetuating the anxiety. And I think with ADHD, again, I think there's, I think the difficulties that you might have there around organising and planning, that genuinely just makes some activities more stressful than than it is for other people. And that will probably make you feel worried. So then again, it's not so much the anxiety is different, but it's what you would do to support with that is different, because it might be that those people need to be thinking about, okay, right, have we got a system? What system can we put in place to support you with the planning, the organisation, and all of those things that will help.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So, Nicky, if you were going to give us your top 3 tips to managing someone else's anxiety or helping someone else manage their anxiety in the context of children and teenagers, which I know you work, which I'm sure we can apply to adults as well, what would they be?
So I think it's probably really important that people understand the purpose of anxiety, and sort of understand that idea about thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, behaviours are all linked together, because that gives you a sort of theoretical background for you to really get it. And, pretty young kids can get that. And there are all sorts of books for kids that are great at helping that. And there's great YouTube videos as well, little clips that are appropriate for all different ages that you can find that will help young people to understand that. I think the other thing is that it's just super important to face your fears. And I know that's really tricky. And I know people might need a little bit of support with that, because as we said, it's completely natural to want to avoid things, but it's about facing your fears in a way that's manageable for you. So doing it in teeny weeny steps if you need to, thinking about that overarching goal and what can you do, what do you need to learn, so that to feel that you are able to cope with the things. And then I think probably it's great to have some support with this as well. That would be the other thing. You need a buddy, right? You need backup, somebody who's on your side, who's going to be your cheerleader, right, throughout all of this. So if you're a parent, what you're going to be saying to your kids is, I noticed when you did that brave thing, right? Well done. I saw you didn't want to talk to John, but you went over and you said hello to him even though you were worried. Well done, you, great stuff. But I imagine it's the same with grown-ups, right? If your partner can do that, fantastic. If you haven't got a partner, maybe your friends can do that, and have somebody there. And again, the role of that cheerleader is not necessarily to be giving reassurance, because as we said before, reassurance can sometimes reduce opportunities for people to learn they can cope. But gentle questioning, cheerleading when things are going well, normal, everyone feels worried about stuff, it's normal, right?
Great advice. And it just shows the importance of air cover, which I've been talking a lot recently. Get your mates around you, get your colleagues around you, just to cheer you on and to make you go for stuff. Really, really important, I think. And books are really good. I love there's something about beat the anxiety gremlin or something like that.
Oh my goodness, there's great books. So Beating the Anxiety Gremlin, there's for older teenagers, there's something called My Anxiety Handbook. For younger kids, there's Poppy O'Neill books, which you see in the works very cheaply at the moment. They're great. What to Do When You Worry Too Much, that's a fantastic book for sort of upper primary, lower secondary school. Whole range of really fantastic books out there for kids and young people to help them understand anxiety, and also strategies about what to do. And also, I must mention this one too. If you've got a child with anxiety, there's an absolutely fantastic book called Helping Your Child with Worries and Fears by Kathy Cresswell and Lucy Willits, which I would very strongly recommend.
And I must say, I was just looking this up while you were talking. One of the best books about anxiety I've read for adults is, swearing alert, Get Your Shit Together by Sarah Knight. And she wrote the magical art of, not giving a F, as it were. And I read that and I just thought it was brilliant. So if you're an adult that's struggling with anxiety, then do check out that book. And I would say as well, do get some help, do get some professional help, because talking to a therapist about this can be really, really helpful, can't it?
Anxiety has got a really good success rate if you get the right support. So, I mean, yes, you can't guarantee everyone will be cured of it, but on the whole, It's a pretty good success rate.
I mean, Nikki, I think managing one's anxiety is a basic life skill that should be taught everywhere. It should be taught at school and at medical school and all other jobs, really, because it's such a big thing, and we're just not very literate about our emotions and what happens with the amygdala and all that sort of stuff. So thank you for all the work you're doing. It's really helpful. So I know that you offer sort of one-to-one and group support for grown-ups, for adults who have children who particularly suffer with anxiety and school avoidance. So if people wanted to get in touch with you about that, how could they find out more?
So they could go to my website, which is odgerspsychology.com. And you can find information there. So yes, so I am going to be running a support group for parents of kids who are worried about attending school. So, and also I've got a PDF that has got some information about resources, so books that are helpful for kids, and also a couple of links to YouTube videos that you can share with your kids if they're anxious, and also a little format around how to support your child to do problem solving.
Great. So we'll put the link to that in the show notes. If you want that, then you can just sign up and get that from Nikki. So Nikki, thank you so much for being on the podcast. That's been really helpful. I think that's going to be helpful for grown-ups with kids with anxiety, grown-ups with colleagues with anxiety, and grown-ups with anxiety themselves. So thank you, and we'll get you back again soon.
Lovely. It's lovely to be here, Rach. Thanks so much.